speaker is Erima Dall, who's the Sydney organiser for Solidarity. So please make Erima welcome. Petros Kotino from Greece. He said Greece is not something particular and special, but part of the capitalist problem. And if we look at what's happening in Greece, there are historic struggles and historic debates, and history there is hanging in the balance. And I think it's posing a very, very stark question. Is there an alternative to cuts, crisis and racism when you actually have the left's alternative government, the radical anti-austerity government, now actually implementing austerity and even continuing the detention centres that they promised to close down? So that question of the session today, is another world possible, is being posed extremely starkly around the world. But I think Greece is just one example of how cuts, crisis and racism do go together in the capitalist system, because the deeper the economic crisis is there, the more vicious it is. We've actually seen that racism can grow into a fascist force, an extreme form of racism that breeds off people's desperation. We've also seen the even stronger growth of the radical far left. But what you have seen is a collapse of the middle ground. That middle ground, that mainstream ideology that we're told every day that if we work hard, if we pay our taxes, if we do our jobs properly, well, things will get better. So just shut up, put your head down, and capitalism will deliver. Actually, that middle ground is not convincing anymore in Greece, and people are looking to alternative ideas. The question is, are those ideas going to come from the radical left, or are they going to come from the extreme racist right? And we have to make sure that it is the radical left. In Australia, we're seeing a reflection of this in much milder terms, but nonetheless very vicious terms. Abbott and the rich and the powerful, they will put the blame on the refugees and the Muslims and the migrants while they dodge their taxes but talk about putting our GST up to 15%, broadening it to cover the cost of online goods. Now they're going to attack our penalty rates, pushing Sunday rates down to Saturday rates, and they're dipping into our pockets to pay for their next taxpayer-funded helicopter ride. But while refugees, for example, are demonised for trying to cross national borders, we found out this week that 10 multinational companies have sent $31 billion of profits to offshore tax havens to avoid paying tax in Australia. So who are those borders really for? They're there to stop the poor and the vulnerable. The rich can flaunt those borders all they like. And in the face of this, we have to stand united. We have to stand to build a united fight. This has been one of the major themes of the conference. We had a fantastic session just before about, Team Australia. That's Abbott's team. That's not our team. Our team is the team, of Muslims, of refugees, of Indigenous Australians, of the working class, of the poor, of, the gay community, all standing together and fighting back. That's our team. But we have to acknowledge where this racism actually does come from. Racism grows, amongst insecurity and vulnerability. The sort of vulnerability that, for example, might come from slashing 17,000 jobs in the public sector, as Abbott has been responsible for, while making it even harder to access Centrelink payments. And Abbott is doing this extremely consciously, in an extremely calculated fashion. Last year, he brought in a horror budget, and we fought back, and we beat some of the big ticket items. We didn't beat everything, but we beat back the attack on Medicare. We beat back the attack to deregulate university fees. And some things he quietly dropped away. Does anyone remember he was actually going to ban youth for 6 months when they were unemployed from even accessing the dollar? That wasn't very popular, so he quietly got rid of that. We did teach him a lesson. So this year he tried a different tactic, bring in a so-called dull budget and at the same time ramp up the national security scare. And while we've had some important discussion about the response to that, we do have to look at squarely in the face. It was actually around the national security square, around the scare, ramping up the Islamophobia, that the gap between Labor and the we have to give an answer to that. Against cuts, we have to demand funding and taxing of the rich. Against racism, we have to offer solidarity and internationalism. And against crisis, we do have to argue against the irrationalities of capitalism and that another world is possible. But we can't just argue this in words. We have to build the sort of social power that can actually deliver. And we have to take directly on Abbott's lies and the Labor Party's complicity, particularly around the racism. It was Labor's votes that helped get the Border Force Act through. They supported in Parliament every bit of national security legislation that Abbott has brought in. And this is one reason why Solidarity has initiated, and why I think everyone in this room and everyone who's come to this conference needs to take a special responsibility in building this demonstration, Communities United rally against fear and racism with diversity and multiculturalism on Saturday, the 19th of September. And we've got a fantastic list of endorsements. The Maritime Union of Australia, Sydney branch, the National Tertiary Education Union, New South Wales, the New South Wales Greens, March Australia, the Islamophobia Watch Australia, Voices Against Bigotry, Indigenous Social Justice Association, Refugee Action Coalition Sydney. This is the first rally of its kind that will have such broad support, and it'll be an extremely important step forward. So if there's one thing people practically take away from this conference, it's build that demonstration. But I just wanted to, I think there is reason to hope. There's a lot of reason to hope. Because Abbott hasn't been having a great couple of weeks, has he? Like, you almost have to feel sorry for the guy. He's tried so hard. He's tried hard to make you forget about his stupidity around the captain's picks. Does anyone remember who knighted Prince Philip, the daughter of Australia? And yet, he just couldn't help himself. He had to stand by Bronwyn Bishop to the end. Every Liberal, wedding that she attended on our bill. He tried, actually, he did try not to let Shorten and the Labor Party get all the credit around a push for same-sex marriage, saying that actually this issue ought to be owned by the Parliament and not any particular party. And yet, when it came to the crunch, I think when he saw people out on that fantastic demonstration, holding hands with each other, he actually just couldn't stomach it, and his, homophobia came pouring straight back out. He said on national radio after that demonstration that this has never been regarded as an appropriate cultural norm. That's his term for bigotry, a cultural norm. He has tried his best actually to take the heat off himself and make the technocrats and the bureaucrats and the state premiers do his dirty work for him, interrogating the unions, drafting up a productivity commission, a neutral expert panel that says we don't need penalty rates anymore, and maybe we should even lower the minimum wage. Only to have the star of the show, Dyson Hayden, who has been leading the Royal Commission into union corruption, accept an invitation to speak at a New South Wales Liberal Party fundraiser for $80 a head. And the resulting headlines are quite satisfying. Storm clouds gathering over Tony Abbott's leadership. Poll spells trouble. Liberal cabinet still split. This can be a one-term government. This can be one-term Tony, and we're going to make sure that that is what happens.
Yes.
But I also want to say, let's not be entirely distracted by the polls, because every day that Abbott remains in power, he remains a menace. Polls won't save 17,000 public sector jobs. They won't save 11,000 people of the Indigenous community who are registered with the Aboriginal Medical Service in Western Sydney that's said to be shut down in September. Polls won't stop runaway climate change, because if we think that we can just wait this out to a Labor government, we have to think again. We have to pave the road of Abbott's walk of shame, and Labor is not going to do that for us. We cannot make the mistake that was made after Howard and after the Work Choices campaign of going quiet for Labor. We have to actually build struggles that are going to push on. I think actually it's people like Chris, it's people like the Hutchinson workers who show us what it really looks like to step up and fight back, taking their struggle to the biggest port terminal multinational company in the world. This struggle was a flame of hope. The doctors and nurses who have come out against the Border Force Act and even dared at it to try and charge them under those gag laws. The sorts of struggles that actually can improve, lives in the here and now, that actually an election of a new government has no guarantee. Rosa Luxemburg once said that the fights for individual reforms under capitalism can feel like the labour of Sisyphus, an endless struggle to push a boulder up a hill only to see it roll back down again. And I think many of the struggles that we're engaged in today can feel a little bit like that. Last year the campaigns that I was involved in to stop the tax on Medicare, to stop the deregulation of university fees, these are actually fights to stop things being taken back off us. They weren't, fights to win more than what we've actually got already. And I think this is what capitalism does, actually. A society controlled by the 1%, a society with no real democracy, where we don't have control, that's run, for profit, in conditions of competition, is always going to want to take more off us. That's what the system is. And in such a system, what it giveth, it can taketh away. And when we're in a slow-burning economic crisis, like we are in the world at the moment, it is always looking to taketh and taketh and taketh a little bit more. But Luxemburg also said that in pushing that boulder, up a hill, over and over again, as tedious as it may feel, actually we build very strong muscles in the process. And I think we have to throw ourselves into all of these struggles so that win or lose, partial victory or out-and-out victory, we do build our muscles. When Hutchinson workers did defy the law, did go out on strike and did get that court victory, even, a limited victory as it is, and even though the struggle has to continue, that was one instance where we have built our muscles. When the teachers and the students at the Yeronga High School stood up for their refugee student who was dragged out of the classroom and taken back to the detention centre, and they actually didn't just let that happen. They organised, demonstrations. That has helped build our muscles. When the ERT workers in Greece actually occupied the entire state broadcaster that was being shut down, and they said, we can run this ourselves, actually. We can run it, under our own control. And when the new Syriza government was elected, they didn't just want their jobs back anymore, they wanted their jobs back, and they wanted to continue to run it with the freedom and with their own expression and their own control as they had done. That kind of action can help us build our muscles. So we have to throw ourselves into these struggles, build our muscles. Solidarity as an organisation doing just this. We believe that another world is possible, and we urge you to join us in the fight for that world.